Hello everyone. Now coming to the set, we have Mr. and Mrs. Sharma and Mr. and Mrs. Oberoi are playing a chess tournament. They play a total of 3 games. Following information is known. This should be known here. No person won more than one match. Okay. The Sharmas won more games than Oberois. Okay. So there are going to be total 3 winners, 3 different winners, because no one has won more than one match. And the number of matches that Sharma wins is more than the number of matches that Oberois win. That means there are only 2 Sharma players, right? Mr. and Mrs. Sharma. So if both of them win the match, so Sharmas will win 2 matches and Oberois will win only 1 match. This is going to be the situation. Next, the men won 2 games and the women won 1 game. Okay, so there are 2 men and both of them are going to win matches. So Mr. Sharma and Mr. Oberoi are definitely going to be winners, and only one female is going to win the match, and that female has to be Mrs. Sharma. So Mrs. Sharma is going to win one of her matches. Okay, so we are done with the first 3 points here. Next, only in the first game were the 2 players married to each other. Okay, so in the first match, so let's say this is match 1, this is match 2 and this is match 3. Only in the first match couple played, otherwise the couples never played together. Okay. Anyone who lost a game cannot play the very next game. Okay, so the loser cannot play the next game. The person who won a game definitely played the next game. So winner is going to play the next game here. Fine. Now let's consider that Oberois, either the first match will be played between Sharmas or Oberois. So let's assume that the first match is being played by Oberois. So this is Mr. Oberoi and Mrs. Oberoi. Now between Mr. and Mrs. Oberoi, Mr. Oberoi will have to win the match because Mrs. Oberoi does not win the match. So Mr. Oberoi wins the match. He goes to the next round, Mr. Oberoi, and Mrs. Oberoi is ruled out. Now the next player can be either Mrs. Oberoi or Mrs. Sharma or Mr. Sharma. So let's just say this is Mr. Sharma. Okay. Now Mr. Oberoi cannot win another match. So the winner for the second match has to be Mr. Sharma. So Mr. Sharma advances to the next round and the next player will have to be Mrs. Sharma, because Mrs. Sharma has to win at least one match, right? So she will have to play at least one match. So now what's happening is there is one more couple playing the third game, but that's not possible because only first game was played by the couple. Okay, so if you see, it is not possible for the first couple to be the Oberois. Even if it was Mrs. Sharma will reach the third match or will play the third match, and this person has to be Mr. Sharma because he has to win at least one match. But again, a couple is playing the third match, which is not possible. So it is definite that the first match will not be between Mr. and Mrs. Oberoi. It has to be definitely be between Mr. and Mrs. Sharma. So let's say this is Mr. Sharma and this is Mrs. Sharma. Okay, fine. Now let's assume that Mr. Sharma wins the match. Let's assume Mr. Sharma wins the match here. Okay, if Mr. Sharma wins the match, the next Mr. Sharma will advance to the next round. Mr. Sharma is going to advance to the next round, and the next player will have to be Mr. Oberoi. The next player will have to be Mr. Oberoi, because if this were Mrs. Oberoi, Mrs. Oberoi will have to win the match. Mr. Sharma cannot win another match. He has already won one of his matches. Mr. Sharma cannot win. So this new player has to win the match, and out of Mr. and Mrs. Oberoi, only Mr. Oberoi can win the match. That means this player has, or the winner for this match will be Mr. Oberoi, since he is going to play the second match. Now Mr. Oberoi reaches the third match or plays the third match. Mr. Oberoi plays the third match. Now who is going to be this player over here? So you see, Mr. Oberoi has won one match, Mr. Sharma has won his one match. Mrs. Sharma has to win one more match, so this has to be Mrs. Sharma over here. This has to be Mrs. Sharma, and Mrs. Sharma is going to win her match over here. Okay? Now, what if Mrs. Sharma won the first match that is played between Mr. and Mrs. Sharma? Okay. So if Mr. Sharma and Mrs. Sharma, they play the match and Mrs. Sharma wins this match. Okay. So in that case, what will happen is Mrs. Sharma will advance to the next round, and the second player in the next round will have to be Mr. Oberoi, because Mrs. Oberoi cannot win the match. The winner of this match has to be the second player, which can only be Mr. Oberoi. Okay, so we have Mr. Oberoi winning the second match again in this case, and he will advance to the next round. Mr. Oberoi advances to the next round here. Now, again, if you see here, Mrs. Sharma has won one of her matches and Mr. Oberoi has won. Mr. Sharma is yet to win the match. That means the second player in third round will have to be Mr. Sharma. It has to be Mr. Sharma over here, and the winner of this round will have to be Mr. Sharma. Okay, so these are the two cases that we have. This is case 1 and this is case 2 for this particular set. Now let's look at the questions. Question 1, who did not play a game? Now if you look at both these cases, Mrs. Oberoi did not play even a single game. That means the answer to first question is Mrs. Oberoi. Now who won the second match? If you look at both these cases, in both the cases Mr. Oberoi wins the second match, so the answer will be Mr. Oberoi. Okay. Now how many games did Mr. Oberoi win? Mr. Oberoi wins only one game in both these cases, hence the answer to this question is the answer to this question is 1 here. Okay, so that's it for this set. Thank you.